not in the meeting that ran too long or the deadline that arrived too fast. They lose it in the first 7 minutes after they open their eyes, before a single decision has been made, before a single word has been spoken, before the world has asked anything of them at all. In those first 7 minutes, the average person checks their phone. They absorb other people's emergencies, other people's opinions, other people's noise, and they hand the entire direction of their mind over to an algorithm before their feet have touched the floor. And then they wonder why, by 10 in the morning, they already feel reactive, behind, scattered. Why the day feels like something happening to them rather than something they are building. Here is what nobody is telling you about that. The morning is not just the start of your day. It is the architecture of your mind for everything that follows. What you do in the first hour after waking does not just affect your mood. Neuroscience now confirms what the Stoics understood 2,000 years ago. The early morning hours are when the brain is most plastic, most receptive, most open to being shaped. The neural pathways you activate in those first 60 minutes are the ones that dominate your thinking, your responses, and your decisions for the next 16 hours. Which means that every morning you spend in reactive consumption, scrolling, absorbing, reacting, you are literally training your brain toward distraction, impulsivity, and dependence on external stimulation. And every morning you spend with intentional, deliberate practice, you are training it toward the opposite. The Stoics were not simply writing philosophy. They were building neurology 2 millennia before anyone had the science to prove it. Marcus Aurelius woke before dawn every single morning, sat alone with his journal, and conducted what he called a morning review. A deliberate, rigorous examination of his values, his intentions, and the obstacles he expected to face that day. Every day, without exception, for decades. This was not ritual for ritual's sake. This was the most powerful man in the Roman Empire engineering his own mind, because he understood that without that engineering, the mind defaults to fear, to reaction, to the path of least resistance. This video is about those 8 habits, the specific, researched, stoically grounded morning practices that do not just make you feel better. They structurally rewire the brain toward discipline, clarity, emotional control, and the kind of quiet, unshakable effectiveness that other people experience as almost supernatural. If you have ever started a morning routine and abandoned it, if you have ever felt like your mornings are running you instead of the other way around, if you have ever sensed that the difference between the life you are living and the life you are capable of living is somewhere in the hours before the world demands your attention, this is the video that will change that. Stay until habit 8, because the final habit is the one the Stoics considered the foundation of all the others, and it is the one almost nobody practices. The one that Marcus Aurelius himself said was the difference between a man who merely reads philosophy and a man who actually lives it. And before we begin, if you are building the kind of life that requires the kind of mind this video develops, subscribe. 1 click. It is the smallest possible investment in a resource that will keep paying forward. Let's build. Habit 1. The first words you speak must be to yourself, not to your phone. Here is something that will make you uncomfortable if you think about it honestly. The first thing most people do in the morning is hand their attention, their most precious, most limited, most neurologically potent resource to someone else. A news outlet, a social media platform, a group chat, a stranger's opinion about something that happened overnight that you cannot control and that will not remember you tomorrow. And you do it before you have said a single word to yourself, before you have checked in with your own mind, before you have asked, who am I being today, and what actually matters? The Stoics considered this a form of surrender, so complete it bordered on self-betrayal. Epictetus opened his most famous work, the Enchiridion, with a single principle he considered more important than everything else. Some things are in our control and others are not. And then he spent the rest of the text making one argument, over and over, in 100 different forms. The moment you hand your attention to something outside your control, you have given up the only thing that was ever truly yours. Your phone in those first minutes is not giving you information. It is giving you other people's priorities, other people's urgency, other people's emotional weather. And your brain, still in its most receptive, most impressionable state, absorbs all of it and begins organizing itself around it. Neuroscientists call this emotional contagion, the documented phenomenon in which exposure to others' emotional states, even in text form, activates the same neural circuits as experiencing those emotions directly. You read about someone's outrage and your amygdala registers threat. You absorb someone's anxiety and your cortisol begins to rise. Your body does not know the difference between experiencing a crisis and reading about one. By the time you have scrolled for 7 minutes, your nervous system is already in a low-grade stress state that will color every interaction, every decision, every thought for the next several hours, and you haven't even stood up yet. The Stoic alternative is not complicated, but it is demanding in a way that reveals exactly how strong your relationship with distraction has become. The first words of your morning must be to yourself, not out loud, necessarily, but the first directed attention of your day, the first thing you deliberately choose to think about, must come from within, not from without. Marcus Aurelius's morning practice began not with input, but with output. He wrote, he thought, he examined, and only after he had established his own mind's orientation did he turn to the demands of the world. He was not hiding from reality. He was choosing the mental state from which he would meet it. Think about two men facing an identical morning. Both have a high-stakes presentation at 9, both woke at 6. The first reaches for his phone. He sees a news alert that triggers anxiety. He sees a colleague's LinkedIn post that triggers comparison. He sees 3 unread emails that trigger obligation. By 6:15, his nervous system is activated, his confidence is slightly undermined, and his mind is scattered across 4 different emotional responses to 4 different external inputs. He gets dressed, eats without tasting anything, and arrives at his 9 o'clock presentation with a mind that has already been running on someone else's fuel for 3 hours. The second man puts his phone face down and out of reach the night before. His alarm goes off and he lies still for 60 seconds, not laziness, but deliberate practice. He asks himself one question: who do I need to be today? He gets up, sits in the same chair he always sits in, and writes for 10 minutes about his intention for the day. Not a to-do list, an intention, a quality of presence, a standard of conduct. His 9 o'clock presentation begins from a mind that has been pointed, organized, and warmed up by its own internal work. He walks into the room, already himself. Which man do you think performs better? Which man do you think the room feels? First, establish a physical barrier between yourself and your phone for the first 30 minutes of every morning. Not willpower, a physical barrier. Charger in another room, phone in a drawer. A simple environmental design that removes the decision entirely. Second, replace the first scroll impulse with a first right practice. 1 page, 1 question. Who am I being today? The question is simple. The practice of answering it honestly every morning is transformative. And finally, understand that the phone will be there in 30 minutes. Nothing will have changed. But you will have changed because you spent the first 30 minutes of the day as the author of your own mind rather than the audience for someone else's. Habit 2, the Stoic Morning Review. Prepare your mind for what is coming. Here is a question almost nobody asks before starting their day. What is going to be hard today? Not what is on my schedule, that is logistics. Not what do I have to do, that is task management. But genuinely, where will I be tested? Where will my patience run thin? Where will my discipline be challenged? Where am I most likely to react in a way I will later regret? The Stoics called the practice of asking these questions premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. It is one of the most psychologically sophisticated techniques in the entire Stoic canon, and modern cognitive psychology has independently confirmed its effectiveness under the name implementation intention, the research-backed practice of mentally rehearsing how you will respond to obstacles before they arrive. The studies on this are striking. People who practice implementation intention, who specifically plan how they will respond to anticipated difficulties, are between 2 and 3 times more likely to follow through on their intentions than people who simply decide what they want to do without preparing for what might get in the way. The Stoics discovered this 2,000 years before the research existed. Marcus Aurelius did not begin his mornings with affirmations about how well the day would go. He began them with rigorous, honest anticipation of difficulty. He wrote in the Meditations, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This was not pessimism. This was preparation. By the time those people arrived in his day, he had already decided how he was going to respond to them from a place of philosophical clarity rather than emotional reaction. That preparation is what made him appear almost unnaturally calm in the face of provocation. Not because he felt nothing, because he had already met the situation in his mind and chosen his response before the situation arrived in the world. Think about two people preparing for a difficult conversation, a feedback session, a negotiation, a confrontation that has been avoided too long. The first person doesn't prepare mentally. They tell themselves it will be fine. They focus on the outcome they want and assume the conversation will go roughly the way they imagine. When it becomes tense, when the other person reacts unexpectedly, when an accusation arrives that wasn't anticipated, when the emotional temperature rises faster than expected, they are caught off guard. Their response is reactive, driven by the surprise of the moment rather than the clarity of their values. The conversation goes sideways. They say something they didn't mean. They either capitulate out of discomfort or escalate out of defensiveness. The second person spends 5 minutes in the morning specifically imagining what could go wrong, not catastrophizing, preparing. This person might get defensive. They might say something unfair. They might bring up a past grievance that catches me off guard. And for each anticipated difficulty, they choose their response in advance. If that happens, I will pause before responding. I will name what I'm feeling rather than acting from it. I will remember that the goal is understanding, not winning. When the conversation becomes difficult, and it does, they are not surprised. They have been there already. They respond from preparation rather than reaction. The conversation, though difficult, moves somewhere real. That is the power of the morning review. Not to eliminate difficulty, to remove its power to destabilize you. First, build a 5-minute morning review into your routine. Write down the 3 most likely challenges you will face today. For each one, write 1 sentence about how the person you are trying to become would respond. Not how you hope it goes, how you will behave if it goes badly. Second, add a values anchor to the review. Pick 1 Stoic value: patience, honesty, courage, generosity, and name it as the quality you are specifically practicing today. That single choice creates a cognitive filter through which the day's events pass. You begin looking for opportunities to practice the virtue, rather than waiting to be ambushed by the opposite. And finally, understand that this practice does not make you rigid or overly serious. It makes you free. Because a mind that has already met its obstacles is not ambushed by them. And a man who is not ambushed by his day is a man who can actually be present in it. Habit 3. Move your body before the world demands your mind. There is a word the Stoics use that modern culture has almost entirely stripped of its original meaning: discipline. Today we associate discipline with restriction, with denial, with gritting your teeth through something unpleasant in service of a future reward. And sometimes it is that. But the Stoics meant something richer and more immediate. By discipline, they meant the practice of ordering the self, of bringing all the parts of a human being, body, mind, emotion, will, into deliberate alignment with the values you have chosen. And they were adamant that this alignment was not merely mental, it was physical. Marcus Aurelius trained daily. Epictetus, despite a physical disability that limited his mobility significantly, emphasized bodily discipline as inseparable from philosophical development. Seneca wrote, "We should take wandering outdoor walks so that the mind might be nourished and refreshed by the open air and deep breathing." This was not wellness advice. It was philosophical instruction because the Stoics understood, through direct observation of thousands of students over centuries, that a man who neglects his body is a man who is operating his philosophy on a compromised instrument. Neuroscience has now caught up to what Epictetus knew by observation. Morning physical activity, specifically in the first 90 minutes after waking, triggers the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which researchers have called miracle grow for the brain. It physically stimulates the growth of new neural connections, particularly in the prefrontal cortex, the exact region responsible for decision-making, impulse control, long-term thinking, and the capacity to pause between stimulus and response. In other words, morning movement does not just build the body, It builds the brain architecture that Stoic practice requires. Think about this practically. Every Stoic virtue, patience, wisdom, courage, self-control, requires a brain that can pause, that can hold competing impulses simultaneously, that can access long-term thinking under short-term pressure. That prefrontal capacity is not fixed, it is trainable. And morning movement is one of the most direct, most well-documented ways to train it. Think about two people managing the exact same high-pressure workday. The first person wakes up, lies in bed for 20 minutes, gets up slowly, drinks coffee while scrolling, and heads to work. His body has been sedentary for 9 or 10 hours. His cortisol is elevated from the night. His brain is sluggish, running below its functional capacity. He will spend the first 2 hours of his workday slowly coming online, and the high-demand moments of his day will arrive before he is fully ready for them. The second person wakes up and moves. It does not have to be extraordinary. A 30-minute walk, a 15-minute strength session, a run around the block. What matters is that his body moves with intention. His breathing deepens, his circulation increases, and his brain begins producing the exact neurochemicals that will define the quality of his thinking for the next 8 hours. By the time his workday begins, he is already operating at a biological peak that most of his colleagues will not reach until midday. That gap between the man whose brain has been activated and the man whose brain is still warming up is not a small advantage in a demanding world. It is the kind of edge that compounds over months and years into a life that looks from the outside like talent. It is not talent, it is a morning habit sustained with Stoic consistency. First, move every morning before external demands begin. Not heroically consistently. 20 minutes of intentional physical activity is enough to trigger the neurological benefits. The form matters less than the commitment. Second, separate your morning movement from your phone entirely. No podcasts, no music, no stimulation. Walk in silence, run in silence. Let your body and your mind be in relationship with each other without mediation. The Stoics called this physical contemplation, using the body's rhythm to allow the mind to process and organize at its own pace. And finally, understand that skipping morning movement is not a neutral choice. It is a choice to start the day with a biologically and philosophically compromised instrument. The Stoic does not accept a compromised instrument when the alternative is 20 minutes of movement. Habit 4. Practice voluntary discomfort on purpose before breakfast. This is the habit that separates people who understand Stoicism intellectually from people who have actually built it into their bodies. And it is the one that will make you most uncomfortable to read about. The Stoics practiced what they called ascesis, deliberate, voluntary exposure to difficulty, not suffering for its own sake, not masochism dressed in philosophy, but the intentional practice of choosing a minor hardship every single day in order to remind the nervous system with absolute clarity that it can handle more than comfort allows it to believe. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He had access to every luxury the most powerful empire in history could provide. And yet, several times each month, he chose to eat only the most basic food, sleep without the comfort of his usual bedding, and wear the simplest clothing, not because he was required to, but because he wanted to know, as he wrote, "Is this the condition I was afraid of?" He wanted to discover, again and again, that the things he feared losing were not the source of his strength, that his strength lived in him, not in his circumstances. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" What he discovered every time was that it was not, that the fear of discomfort was always larger than the discomfort itself, and that each time he voluntarily chose the difficulty, the fear shrank, permanently, by a measurable amount. This is not ancient superstition. This is exactly what exposure therapy, one of the most evidence-based psychological interventions ever developed, demonstrates in clinical settings. Voluntary, controlled exposure to the thing you fear reduces the fear response at the neurological level. The amygdala, which processes threat, literally updates its threat assessment based on lived experience. When you choose discomfort and survive it, your brain recalibrates its estimate of how dangerous discomfort actually is. The morning is the perfect time for this practice because it sets the emotional and psychological tone for everything that follows. A cold shower. A hard conversation you have been avoiding for days. Skipping the morning coffee you're somewhat dependent on. Getting up at the time you set rather than negotiating with yourself for 10 more minutes. These are not dramatic acts. But the pattern they create, the daily experience of, I chose something hard and I did, it builds a quality of self-trust that no amount of motivation or inspiration can replicate. Think about two men who both say they want to build a harder, more disciplined life. The first man reads about discipline. He watches videos about it. He feels genuinely motivated. He plans the hard changes he is going to make starting Monday. And then Monday comes, and the comfort of his current habits is right there, immediately accessible, and the change he planned feels slightly less urgent than it did on Sunday. He negotiates. He defers. He is not a weak person. He is a person whose nervous system has never been trained to override comfort on command. When the moment of choice arrives, comfort always wins, because it has always won. The second man starts smaller than motivation. He doesn't wait for Monday. He doesn't wait to feel ready. He picks one small, voluntary discomfort each morning and does it. Today it is a cold shower. Tomorrow it is a 4-mile walk in the rain. The day after, it is skipping the thing he reaches for when he is anxious. Each morning, the choice is simple and non-negotiable. And what accumulates over 60 days is not just a collection of small, hard things done. It is a new relationship with difficulty itself. His nervous system has updated. The gap between I should do this hard thing and I am doing this hard thing has closed not because he has more motivation, but because he has built the neural architecture of a person who follows through. That architecture was built in the mornings, one small choice at a time. First, identify one voluntary discomfort you will practice every morning this week. Make it specific, make it uncomfortable enough to matter, and make it non-negotiable. The cold shower is a cliche because it works. Start there if you need a starting point. Second, practice what Seneca called the poverty exercise. At least once per week, deliberately remove one comfort from your morning that you normally consider essential. Discover, as he discovered, that you are larger than your dependencies. And finally, keep a record. Each morning you practice voluntary discomfort, mark it, not as a performance, as evidence. The accumulation of marks is the accumulation of a new self-concept. I am the kind of person who does hard things in the morning. That self-concept, once established, begins to govern every subsequent decision of the day. Habit 5. The Stoic journal, write what your mind won't say out loud. Most people think they know what they think. They don't. They know what they feel, they know what they react to, they know what they tell other people about their inner life. But what they actually think, the real architecture of their beliefs, their fears, their contradictions, their unexamined assumptions about themselves and the world, most people have never actually looked at that directly. Because looking at it requires something most people avoid with extraordinary creativity. Sitting alone with your own mind and writing down what you find there. The Stoics built this practice into the daily structure of their lives with an almost religious consistency. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations was not a philosophical treatise. It was not written for publication. It was never meant to be read by anyone other than himself. It was a daily journal, raw, repetitive, sometimes contradictory, often circling back to the same struggles again and again of a man rigorously examining his own mind every morning for 20 years. And the fact that he had to write about the same struggles repeatedly is one of the most important things about the Meditations that almost nobody talks about. He wrote about the same weaknesses again and again: impatience with foolish people, distraction, the desire for praise, the pull toward inaction. Not because writing about them once solved them, but because the daily practice of examination was itself the discipline, not a rival, process. Modern psychology has produced a remarkable body of research on expressive writing, the practice of writing about your thoughts and feelings without a performance audience. The findings are consistent and striking. Regular expressive writing reduces anxiety, improves immune function, increases clarity of thinking, reduces rumination, and improves decision-making quality. James Pennebaker, the psychologist who pioneered this research at the University of Texas, found that even 15 minutes of expressive writing per day produced measurable changes in both psychological and physical health within weeks. The Stoics did not have this research. They had something better. 2,000 years of direct observation of what happened to men who wrote every morning versus men who did not. Think about two people both carrying the same weight, a decision they cannot make, a fear they cannot name, an anger they haven't fully processed. The first person carries it in their head. They think about it constantly, usually in the unproductive, circular way that the mind spirals when it lacks structure. They replay the same scenarios. They rehearse the same arguments. They feel the same frustration rising in the same situations day after day without it ever fully resolving. Not because they are not intelligent, because unstructured thinking on emotionally charged material is almost always circular. The mind returns to the same place it started. The second person writes, not to solve, to examine. They sit down with their journal and write, what am I actually feeling about this and why? Then, what do I actually believe about this situation, and is that belief accurate? Then, what is within my control here and what is not? Within 15 minutes, the circular loop has been broken. Not because the situation has changed, because the act of writing forces the mind to move linearly through material it was previously spinning in circles around. The clarity that emerges is not dramatic. It is quiet and practical and completely reliable. Seneca captured the purpose of this practice in a single sentence. I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself. That daily examination, conducted in the privacy of the page, without defense and without performance, is where genuine self-knowledge is built. First, begin each morning with 10 minutes of undirected writing. Not a to-do list, not affirmations. Writing that starts with what is actually on my mind right now, and follows wherever that question leads. The quality does not matter. The honesty does. Second, add one Stoic question to your morning journal practice. Where did I act in a way I am not proud of yesterday, and what will I do differently today? This is not self-punishment. It is the daily calibration that prevents small character failures from becoming permanent character traits. And finally, understand that the journal is not a productivity tool. It is a mirror. And a man who looks honestly in the mirror every morning builds a relationship with himself that cannot be destabilized by what anyone else says about him. He has already told himself the truth. Habit 6. Define your one essential task before the world gives you 20. Here is why most intelligent, hardworking people consistently underperform relative to their own capacity. They are busy. Constantly, legitimately, relentlessly busy. Their days are full. Their calendars are packed. They are always working on something. And yet at the end of most days, something nags the sense that the important thing, the thing that actually moves the needle on what matters most, did not get the attention it deserved. Because it was surrounded by urgency that was not importance, by the noise of the immediate that drowned out the signal of the essential. The Stoics were not productivity philosophers in the modern sense, but they were deeply preoccupied with a related question. What is the proper use of a human life? And their answer, consistently, was some version of this: to act in accordance with nature, with reason, and with virtue, which required knowing, at every moment, what the most important action available to you actually was. Not the most urgent, not the most visible, the most important. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Confine yourself to the present," and the key word is confine. This was a man governing an empire perpetually surrounded by thousands of legitimate demands on his attention. And he practiced the discipline of confining his full presence to the one most important thing at hand, rather than fragmenting it across everything that could legitimately claim it. Seneca was even more direct. While we are postponing, life speeds by. There is nothing, Lucilius, that takes up as little time as a human life, and nothing that, when wasted, is more definitively gone. That urgency, not panic, but clarity about the cost of distraction, drove the Stoic practice of intentional prioritization. Modern research on productivity and cognitive performance confirms this with painful precision. Knowledge workers who attempt to manage more than 3 genuine priorities simultaneously do not become 3 times as productive. They become fragmented, operating in a state of continuous partial attention that reduces the quality of thinking on every individual task. The brain cannot do deep work and task switching simultaneously. The cost of switching between tasks is not zero. Researchers at the American Psychological Association found that task switching reduces productivity by up to 40%, meaning that the person managing 10 tasks simultaneously is not doing 10 things at 60%. They are doing 10 things at 40%. The math of multitasking is always a loss. The Stoic morning practice of defining one essential task is not a rejection of everything else on the list. It is the acknowledgement that not everything on the list is equal, and that the most important thing deserves to be chosen deliberately in the clarity of the morning before the momentum of the day has made everything feel equally urgent. Think about two people with identical workloads and identical intelligence. The first person begins every day by opening their email. Their day's shape is immediately determined by what arrived overnight, other people's requests, responses, questions, and demands. By 9, they are already in reactive mode, managing incoming rather than building the important outgoing. By the end of the day, they have answered 70 emails and attended 4 meetings and feel thoroughly exhausted. The project that actually matters, the one that requires sustained creative thought and strategic vision, is still at the same point it was yesterday, because it never got the uninterrupted, high-quality attention it required. There was always something else first. The second person begins every day by asking one question before touching anything else. What is the single most important thing I could do today that would move what actually matters forward? They write the answer down. And then they protect the first 90 minutes of their workday for that one thing before email, before messages, before meetings, before the world's urgency has a chance to override their own priorities. By 10:30, they have done the most important work of the day. Everything else that follows is maintenance and management of a life that is already moving in the right direction. Over 6 months, the gap between these two people's actual progress, not their busyness, but their actual movement toward what matters, is not marginal. It is enormous. First, every morning, write down the one essential task for the day. Not 3, not 5, 1. The one that, if completed, would make the entire day a success regardless of what else you did or did not accomplish. Second, protect the first 90 minutes of your working time for that one task with the same commitment you would protect a meeting with the most important person you know, because you are that person. And finally, understand that the discipline to choose one essential thing and do it first is not just a productivity technique. It is a Stoic practice of aligning your actions with your values every single day in the only time that actually exists now. Habit 7. Practice gratitude like a Stoic, not like a greeting card. There is a version of gratitude practice that has become so watered down, so commercially packaged, so reduced to bullet points and Instagram aesthetics, that it has lost almost all of its actual power. The version where you write 3 things you are grateful for every morning, and those 3 things are, 9 days out of 10, your health, your family, and your morning coffee. That is not what the Stoics meant, and it is not what produces the neurological and psychological benefits that genuine gratitude practice actually delivers. The Stoic practice of gratitude was not about listing pleasant things. It was about confronting impermanence, about deliberately, vividly, honestly contemplating the reality that everything you value could be lost. And in that contemplation, arriving at a quality of appreciation so acute, so present, so full, that it could not be dismissed as a platitude or a habit or a checkbox. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Do not indulge in such thoughts as these, that I have lost it, but I have returned it." When a person he loved died, when a situation he valued ended, when something he had been given was taken back, he did not process this as deprivation. He processed it as the completion of a gift, and in doing so, experienced the full weight of how extraordinary the gift had been while it was present. This practice, which the Stoics sometimes called negative visualization, has been validated by contemporary hedonic psychology in ways that are almost counterintuitive. Studies by Sonia Lubomirsky at the University of California, Riverside, and subsequent research by Timothy Wilson and Daniel Gilbert at Harvard found that the most effective way to increase appreciation for what you have is to vividly contemplate not having it. People who imagined losing their job, their health, their most important relationship, and then contemplated those things in their actual present reported dramatically higher well-being and life satisfaction than people who simply listed positive things. The mechanism is attention. We stop seeing what we have stopped noticing, and we stop noticing what has become familiar. Negative visualization forces attention back, and the quality of appreciation that returns with it is categorically different from gratitude as a habit. Think about two people practicing gratitude in the morning. The first person writes 3 things they are grateful for in their journal. They are sincere about it. They mean it. But the list is familiar and comfortable, and by the time they have written it, they are already thinking about the day ahead. The gratitude did not land anywhere. It was a practice performed rather than an experience had. The second person does something slightly different. They sit for 5 minutes and specifically imagine the absence of something they love, not to create anxiety, to create presence. They imagine, in real detail, what their morning would be like if the person they most love were no longer in their life. They sit with that absence until it is genuinely felt. And then they return to the actual present where that person exists, where that love is real, where the gift is still here, and the quality of appreciation that arrives in that return is not a checkbox. It is a visceral, full-body, undeniable aliveness to what is actually present. That is the Stoic gratitude practice. Not pleasant, deeply effective, completely transformative over time. Seneca wrote, "Omnia aliena sunt, corpus nostrumque, quia non possumus." Everything is borrowed, nothing is permanently ours. And the man who actually lives from that knowledge, who meets each morning not as an entitlement but as a gift returned, meets his life with a quality of attention and presence that makes everything he does more real. First, upgrade your gratitude practice from listing to imagining. Choose one thing you deeply value and spend 3 minutes specifically contemplating its absence. Then return to its presence. Let the contrast do the work. Second, extend the Stoic practice of amor fati, love of fate, into your morning by including one thing that is currently difficult in your gratitude practice. Not toxic positivity, but the genuine Stoic recognition that the difficulty is where your growth is happening and is therefore, in the deepest sense, something to be valued. And finally, practice what Marcus Aurelius modeled every morning. Thanksgiving for the extraordinary fact of consciousness itself, for the unreasonable gift of being alive, being capable of thought, being present on the earth at this particular moment. That Thanksgiving is not sentimental. It is the foundation of a mind that does not take its existence for granted, and a mind that does not take its existence for granted is a mind that uses its existence with rare, extraordinary care. Habit 8. The evening sets the morning. The habit, the Stoics called, the foundation of all others. Here is the habit you did not expect. The one that Marcus Aurelius called the prerequisite for everything else. The one that makes every other habit in this list either possible or impossible. And the one that almost nobody includes in any conversation about morning routines. The morning begins the night before. Not metaphorically, literally. The neurological state you wake up in, the cortisol curve, the quality of your prefrontal function, your emotional baseline, your resilience and your clarity is determined by everything that happened in the final 90 minutes of your previous day. And in our current cultural moment, those 90 minutes are spent in a way that is, neurologically speaking, almost perfectly designed to undermine everything a morning routine is trying to build. Blue light exposure from screens in the 90 minutes before sleep suppresses melatonin production by up to 58%, according to research from Harvard Medical School. The result is not just falling asleep later, it is a fundamental disruption of sleep architecture that reduces the proportion of deep, restorative sleep the brain requires to consolidate learning, process emotions, and restore the prefrontal function that Stoic practice demands. In other words, the man who scrolls until midnight and then tries to practice morning philosophy is trying to build on a foundation that has been compromised the night before. The Stoics understood this. Epictetus taught that each day must be a complete unit, examined, closed, and prepared for continuation. He instructed his students, every day examine your actions. Did I do anything unjust today? Did I follow through on what I said I would? What have I done to improve my character? This was not a morning practice. It was an evening practice, a nightly review that completed the day and set the conditions for the following one. Seneca formalized this into a specific nightly ritual, writing, "When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of the habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. 3 questions every night, without exception. What bad habit did I put right today? What fault did I resist? In what respect am I better?" The power of this practice is not just introspective, it is architectural. By completing the day with a review, the mind does not carry unprocessed material into sleep. The rumination that keeps people awake, the cycling through conversations that went wrong, decisions that are unresolved, fears that have no immediate object is substantially reduced when the day has been examined and closed deliberately. Sleep improves, deep sleep increases, and the morning that follows begins from a neurological state that is measurably higher quality. Think about 2 men practicing identical morning routines. The first man has extraordinary morning discipline. He wakes early, journals, exercises, reviews his day ahead, but at night, he is less rigorous. He watches content until he is drowsy, often into the small hours. He falls asleep with his phone on his chest. He sleeps for fewer hours than his body requires, and fewer of those hours are restorative. His morning routine is being built on a foundation that is crumbling beneath it. He is disciplined in the light and undisciplined in the dark. And the morning routine, however sincere, cannot fully compensate for what the night is undoing. The second man is equally intentional at night as he is in the morning. An hour before sleep, the screens go dark. He moves through what Epictetus and Seneca both prescribed: a quiet review of the day, 3 questions answered honestly on the page. He prepares the things he will need in the morning so that nothing stands between him and his first intention of the day. He sleeps in a room that is dark and cool and undisturbed. He wakes not to an alarm dragging him out of deep sleep, but to a body that has completed its restorative cycle and is ready physiologically, neurologically, psychologically to meet the morning with full capacity. His morning routine is not a fight against his own biology. It is the natural continuation of an evening that prepared for it. That is the final and most important Stoic habit of the morning. Not something you do at dawn, something you choose the night before. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in what may be the most honest line in the entire Meditations, "Confine yourself to the present." He was not just talking about avoiding future anxiety. He was talking about the practice of completing each day, fully closing it, with examination, with gratitude, with honesty, so that it did not bleed into the next morning with its unresolved weight. Each day, a complete life. Each night, a small death that is prepared for rather than fallen into. Each morning, a new beginning that has been made possible by what came before it. First, establish a hard stop on screens 90 minutes before your intended sleep time. Not because you have been told to, because you now understand precisely what is happening in your brain when you don't and you are not willing to compromise the one resource your entire morning practice depends on. Second, adopt the Stoic evening review as your nightly ritual. 3 questions, 5 minutes. What did I do well today? Where did I fall short? What will I do differently tomorrow? Write the answers, close the journal, complete the day. And finally, understand what the Stoics understood and what the neuroscience confirms. The morning routine is not the intervention. The morning routine is the harvest. The evening is the soil preparation. The man who tends both, who is as deliberate in how he closes each day as in how he opens the next, is not practicing a morning routine. He is practicing a life, and the difference between those 2 things is the difference between a technique and a transformation. The 8 habits are now yours, not as information, as practice, as the specific, repeatable, philosophically grounded, neurologically validated daily structure of a man who is not waiting to become the person he intends to be. Who is building that person deliberately in the quiet hours before the world demands anything. Marcus Aurelius did not become the philosopher king by accident. He became it through 20 years of daily practice, the same questions, the same refusal to let a single morning pass without deliberate, intentional engagement with who he was choosing to be. That choice is available to you, right now. Not in some ideal future when circumstances are more convenient. In the morning that is coming tomorrow, before anything else begins. Wake before the world. Take back the first hour. Build the mind that the life you want requires. The Stoics knew the secret 2,000 years ago. Now it is yours. If this reached something you have been looking for, there is another video on screen right now that goes deeper into the Stoic practice of building a life that is genuinely your own. Click it. Stay in the work. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now. The people who need this most are still looking for a channel willing to take the philosophy seriously. You found it. Share it.